subscribe.
After my parents had died in a tragic car accident, they had left me a small inheritance. At the time, I had been struggling as a writer, with little success, and was losing inspiration. And although my relationship with them was somewhat strained, their loss hit me hard, and my mind wasn't right. I couldn't concentrate on life, and I was unable to get my career off the ground. Opting for a brand new start, I decided to take some of the money I was given from their estate and buy a home up in the mountains to escape the world for a while. I thought that getting away from people might get me to focus on my writing and help me to reevaluate my life. My parents used to take me to the Pocono Mountains when I was a child, and I had nothing but great memories from those times, so that's where I decided to look. It didn't take long till I found exactly what I was looking for, a picturesque relic nestled deep in the woods and away from other homes and people. The grand old structure built in 1915 drew me in immediately with its faded charm, and it felt right for me in ways that I couldn't explain. Little did I know that beneath its weathered charming facade lay a dark and sinister history. Well, the sale went off without a hitch, though the previous owner's eagerness to part with the property raised a few eyebrows in town, as they seemed to be asking considerably less than what the market value would have indicated. I just assumed that they were in a hurry to sell, being that they themselves had inherited the home from their mother who recently passed. Rumors also circulated that they had changed their family name for some unknown reason and left behind any trace of their connection to the home once the sale went through. Perhaps they too were looking for a fresh start. Who am I to judge, right? My initial summer at the house was filled with a sense of renewal. It was going every bit as good as I had hoped for, and I found that I had an undiscovered passion for restoration projects, which turned out to be a great thing because this old house needed some tender loving care. But I wouldn't be writing this story if everything continued to go as well as it had to up to now. One night, everything changed. While I was sitting in my study working on an outline for a new book, I heard it, a faint ghostly whisper that seemed to emanate from the walls somewhere. I followed the sound, which led me through the living room, toward the back of the house, and to the window overlooking the backyard. There in front of an old shed, I saw a ghostly figure of a woman. She stared at me with sadness in her eyes as she pointed towards the shed. I can't explain it, but I felt that she was somehow asking me for help. I reached to turn on the exterior lights and headed out towards the shed, but when I arrived, she was gone, leaving me to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. The next morning, I went out to the shed and checked inside. The figure of the woman was clear, and there was something inside that shed. Yet it had been completely empty since I had moved in, and I hadn't bothered to do anything with it up to this point. As I examined the ground inside, I noticed that it was strangely only 3/4 concrete, with the back of the shed floor made of loose dirt. With only one possible thing to do, I grabbed the shovel and started removing some of the loose dirt, not even sure what I was looking for. About 4 feet down, I hit a long, narrow burlap bag wrapped with twine. Oh Lord, this definitely looks like it could be a body. I unraveled the bag and looked inside, and my worst fears were confirmed. There in the bag were human bones and an article of women's clothing. My mind did its best to grapple with this horrifying truth. My newfound sanctuary concealed a dark and sinister history, along with the tortured spirit of an unknown woman. Contacting the authorities, I explained to them my gruesome discovery. They descended upon the house in large numbers, and so did the media.
There's a mystery surrounding skeletal remains found underneath the floorboards at a house in North.
And my once dream home was now marked as a crime scene. They never once asked me why I decided to dig in that spot, and I'm not sure that I would have told them the truth. The identity of the body was never revealed, but I couldn't help but wonder about the family who had sold me the house, what secrets they had left behind, and what had compelled them to sever ties to this place. In my quest for answers, I uncovered a web of dark secrets about that family that stretched back generations. The original family members, now all deceased themselves, were connected to a series of unsolved disappearances that had plagued the town for decades. And although under suspicion, no evidence was ever found pointing to any wrongdoing on their part, at least not until now. The case of the unknown woman remains a mystery, and my mountain paradise, once a symbol of my dreams, has become a haunting enigma that begs to be unraveled, but sadly never will. Back in the day, my buddy Mike and I were in a bit of a tight spot. We needed a place to crash that wouldn't drain our wallets. That's when we stumbled upon this rundown duplex on the outskirts of Rockwell. If you haven't heard of it, no surprise. It's a sleepy little town in Oregon. The neighborhood was nothing to write home about, but the rent was too good to pass up. Mike and I have been inseparable since middle school, and we were both stuck in dead-end jobs, which made this new living arrangement seem like a stroke of luck. Little did we know what was in store for us. Across the street, there was this eerie-looking house, a real ancient relic. Its once white paint had faded to a sickly gray, the fence was rusted, and the lawn was overgrown with weeds so thick and tall they came up to your waist. It was clearly abandoned, as were so many other homes in that area. We soon met some of the neighbors, a curious bunch. On one side there was Old Man Harris, a war veteran with a cranky disposition, always giving us the stink eye whenever we passed by. We tried to avoid him as much as possible. And on the other side was Rosie, a cheerful woman whose family has lived in Rockwell for generations. She had a penchant for sharing bizarre stories about the town's history, but she was a lot of fun to chat with over the backyard fence. One evening, as we sat on the porch sharing a couple of cold ones, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I crushed my beer can and pointed to the upstairs window of the eerie house across the street. "Did you see that?" Mike squinted and finally said, "No, what are you talking about?" All I could describe was the face of a kid with huge eyes staring at me from behind a foggy glass window. It was unnerving to say the least. Mike thought I was pulling his leg, but there was something about those eyes that spooked me and piqued my interest. Later that night, curiosity got the better of us. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, just in case, we decided to investigate the abandoned house. We crept through the overgrown backyard and found a way through the back door, which was surprisingly unlocked. The interior was like a time capsule from the 70s. Floral wallpaper peeling at the edges, faded shag carpeting, and dusty furniture that hadn't been sat on in decades. As we cautiously made our way upstairs, we both felt a growing sense of unease. We reached the top floor, and after a quick search, found nothing out of the ordinary, just empty rooms filled with old, forgotten belongings. But as we turned to leave, I heard it, the creaking of a floorboard from the room at the end of the hallway. Mike and I exchanged nervous glances, and then I heard it again, louder this time. We didn't stick around to see what was making the noise. We sprinted back down the stairs, out the back door, and back into our own duplex. Next day, we recounted our story to Rosie, who loves a good mystery. She told us that the house had been empty for a very long time, as long as she could remember, and ever since the Johnsons moved out years ago. They were a reclusive family, rarely ever seen in town. We couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about that house. That face and those eyes that I saw in the window were still in the back of my mind. We decided to do some research at the local library, and what we uncovered was unsettling to say the least. The Johnsons had a son named David, who had gone missing when he was just 10 years old. His disappearance had been the talk of the town for months. The authorities had searched high and low, but never found a trace of him. As we delved deeper into the disappearance mystery of David, we joked that what I had seen in the upstairs window was the face and eyes of the young kid, still trapped in that house after all these years. But deep down inside, I started to spook myself, but I didn't admit that to Mike. One night, we mustered up the courage to investigate further. Armed with flashlights, we ventured back into the abandoned house, determined to uncover the truth. As we climbed the creaking staircase to the second floor, we both heard faint whispers or the sound of a light wind, and we started to second-guess our mission as we reached the room at the end of the hallway. The door swung open with a slow, eerie creak, revealing a room frozen in time. Toys from decades ago laid scattered on the floor, and a child's drawings covered the walls. In the corner on the floor, we saw a photograph in a frame of a young boy. It looked a lot like the face I saw in the window, and being that the Johnsons only had one child, I had to assume it was a picture of David. Just then, we felt the room temperature drop and again heard the sound of footsteps on the creaky wooden floors. This time from downstairs, then a sudden door slam. At that, Mike and I didn't hesitate, and without saying a word, we both ran to the bedroom window, climbed onto the roof outside, and hung down from the edge before dropping the rest of the way onto a soft patch of weeds. We hightailed it out of there and went around the side yard, onto the street, and back to our place. From the safety of our living room, we recomposed ourselves and peeked out across the street at the house to see if we can see anyone. That's when we saw that face again, the same one I had seen before, and the one that looked a lot like the kid in the picture that we found in that forgotten room. We never went back into that house or got to the bottom of that encounter, and we never saw that face again in the window. It very well could have been a kid or a group of kids playing around as kids do. The truth is we'll never know, but we convinced ourselves that we had seen the ghost of David Johnson. Both my parents have large families, so growing up I was always surrounded by aunts and uncles. But there was one particular uncle who always struck me as peculiar. He and his wife, I guess she's considered my aunt or my aunt-in-law, were always at each other's throats, and every rare encounter I had with them was marred with their constant arguments. Their children, my cousins, were equally strange, but I got along with them for the most part. It may have been because one of them was my age. Their family had a knack for relocating frequently. From the time I was 5 until I turned 14, they moved more than a dozen times, and despite their odd personalities, and with the encouragement of my parents, I made efforts to spend time with them, even spending weekends at their ever-changing residences. One time, they moved into a farmhouse with vast acres of land, animals, and an adjacent, depopulated forested area. It was a kid's paradise. The first day at their new farmhouse went well. I didn't see much of my aunt and uncle, but I bonded with my cousins. We played video games, watched movies, listened to music, and I even got to feed the horses. I really enjoyed myself. One evening after dinner, one of my cousins and I ventured in my aunt's and uncle's bedroom. She confided in me about a secret room hidden in there. My curiosity piqued and I enthusiastically followed her. However, my excitement quickly turned to disappointment when she merely opened the closet door. I tried to explain to her that it was just a closet for clothes, but she giggled and insisted there was more to it. She then revealed a small crawl space in the back of the closet. She asked me to follow her inside, but I hesitated. That was the first time that I became aware that I had claustrophobia. She assured me over and over that it was safe and that I had to check it out, even though it was pitch dark. I couldn't help but ask questions, trying to suppress my nerves and stall. She explained that the crawl space extended quite far back, and that she hadn't explored it with a light yet. However, she mentioned something eerie. As you ventured deeper, it felt like you were descending into a hole. I wasn't sure what she meant by this, and this architectural abnormality didn't sit right with me, but she persuaded me to enter, and against my better judgment, I agreed. I watched as she entered the crawl space and seemingly disappeared into the darkness. Though it felt like an eternity, she eventually poked her head out and urged me to follow. I cautiously entered, and the narrow crawl space forced us onto our hands and knees. My anxiety heightened as I crawled blindly through the pitch black, seemingly endless void. As we shuffled along, we kicked up dust so thick that it was hard to breathe. After just a few more feet, I decided I'd had enough. The darkness, combined with my claustrophobia and my inability to breathe, overwhelmed me. I backed out of the crawl space, disappointing my cousin. She probably expected me to be brave, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something just wasn't right inside. The next morning, she teased me about being afraid of the dark, and her taunts really irked me. Now fueled by irritation and a dented ego, I decided I had to prove her wrong. I vowed to re-enter the crawl space alone, determined to show her that I wasn't afraid. We returned to the closet, and she stood outside as I put on a brave face and reluctantly crawled back inside. I ventured deeper, the claustrophobia resurfacing. I felt a rush of cold air near my hand, followed by something wet and slimy. It didn't resemble water, instead it had a rotten, moldy odor. Just then, I felt cold, clammy fingers gripping my arm right below my wrist, and I panicked and let out a scream and backed out of there as quickly as I could. When I finally made it out, I was shaking and desperately wanting to tell my cousin what had just happened, but she wasn't there. I rushed downstairs and found her in the living room watching TV, oblivious to my ordeal. Later, my aunt and uncle arrived home, and I asked them to take me back to my parents' house. They obliged, and I never discussed the incident with my family or my cousins. My aunt and uncle, as usual, moved again a few months later. I could never explain that terrifying event, but I sometimes think about it and try to rationalize it as my fear causing my brain to play tricks on me. But I swear it felt 100% real to me, and there had to be someone in there with me.